One of President Bill Clinton's top former aides, who also happened to have connections to Jeffrey Epstein, well, he apparently just killed himself. Specifically, the man in question is Mr. Mark Middleton. And in the 1990s, during the Clinton administration, Mark served in the White House as an aide to the president. And notably, during his stint in Washington, Mark was the one to sign in Jeffrey Epstein to the White House on 7 different occasions. Furthermore, when you examine the contents of Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book, you find that on page 76, there's an entry for Mark, including his name, his address, and several phone numbers, which would seem to make sense, because Mark was not only likely Epstein's contact within the White House, but also there might have been something else. Because according to an internal White House investigation that took place during the 90s, Mark Middleton was attempting to be something like an international dealmaker during his stint in Washington. Here's an article from the Daily Beast of all places that gives a bit more color to what was happening. And by the way, if you appreciate content like this, I do hope you take a quick moment to smash those like and subscribe buttons, which quite literally forces the YouTube algorithm to share this video out to ever more people. And now here's what the report on the matter said. Quote, Jeffrey Epstein's name also turns up in connection with another shadowy figure in the Clinton administration, White House aide Mark E. Middleton. A friend of Clinton's from Arkansas and an early addition to the president's campaign, Mark joined the administration in 1993 as a special assistant to Chief of Staff Mac McLarty. Over that same time period, a source with knowledge of the situation told the Daily Beast that Middleton met with Epstein in the White House at least 3 times. It is unclear what they discussed or for how long. Middleton did not respond to repeated calls and emails for comment or to a reporter who visited his home in Arkansas. Although, to be fair, if a reporter from the Daily Beast ever showed up to my house, I would also probably just tell him to go kick rocks. But regardless, the report continues by saying that Middleton also had a connection to Donald Trump, and then it continues by writing this, quote, hobnobbing with businessmen like Epstein and Trump was part and parcel of Middleton's White House job, according to a 1999 report from the House Committee on Government Reform. But it also got the lawyer in trouble with the administration once he left. And indeed, the trouble that Mark found himself in had to do with the fact that it appeared that he was using his White House access to become something like an international dealmaker. Specifically, in the late 1990s, shortly after Mark left the White House, the LA Times ran a story, you can see it up on your screen, documenting how Mark Middleton's executive privilege was actually revoked after an internal investigation within the White House determined that he was abusing both his connections as well as his position. Here's specifically what that report said, quote, White House officials announced on Friday that they found evidence that Mark Middleton, a former presidential aide, abused his White House access to impress business clients. He had been barred from entering the executive mansion without high-level approval. The decision came in response to indications that Middleton, a former aide to presidential advisor Thomas McLarty, had flaunted his White House connections in an effort to become an international dealmaker. Among other things, he is accused of using his White House business cards and keeping a voicemail message on the White House telephone system long after he had left his job there. He is also accused of taking business clients to the White House dining room without authorization and portraying himself as someone with influence among President Clinton's inner circle. Now, it is worth mentioning that Mark denied these claims, but what's undeniable is the fact that the White House did revoke his privileges nonetheless. Also, it's worth noting that within a New York Post article, it says this, quote, Mark was also reported to have flown on Epstein's infamous Lolita Express jet. However, take that with a grain of salt, because for the life of me, I have not been able to confirm that fact with the flight logs that are publicly available. And so I don't know exactly what the New York Post is basing that claim on. Regardless, with all that as the backstory, you fast forward to May of 2022, and sadly, Mark was found dead on his ranch over in Arkansas. Now, initially, the police report wasn't made public, but after a Freedom of Information Act request and about a year's worth of time, eventually it was unsealed. And what the police report revealed was that Mark was found on his ranch with a gunshot wound to his chest and an extension cord tying his neck to a tree. But the report also stated that there was no gun found at the scene. Here's an excerpt from the report of the finding officer, the officer who actually found the body. Quote, Deputy Brewer and I walked out to where the male was seated. As we were approaching him, I could see the male was obviously deceased. I could see that he had a gunshot wound to the chest and that he had a knot tied in an extension cord that was around his neck and was attached to the limb directly above him. At this point, I secured the scene. Returning to the vehicle, I began an inventory search, and upon searching the vehicle, I was able to locate the purchase agreement that had Mark E. Middleton's name on it. There were a few other items located in the vehicle. I opened the trunk lid and located a gun case that had 3 boxes of 12-gauge buckshot but no weapon. However, despite this excerpt, the death was ruled to be self-inflicted. And so you might be asking yourself at this point, how could that be possible? How could there be no gun at the scene, but the death was ruled to be self-inflicted? Well, despite what the official report from the finding officer said, a new set of documents from within the police department gave a contrary claim, saying that actually, they did find a 12-gauge shotgun about 30 feet away from the body. Here's what the new set of documents claim. Quote, "It is believed that Mr. Middleton pulled the trigger on the firearm, causing it to discharge and strike him in the chest, and then he fell from the bench, causing the extension cord to become tight, cutting off his breathing." With the official explanation here for why the gun was so far away from the body being that it just recoiled 30 feet. Now, whether you believe that or not, that is the official explanation. Although, to be frank with you, if the police report said that the gun was 100 feet away, I wouldn't believe it. But 30 feet is within the realm of possibility. Regardless, though, I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you really think happened here? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them later today. And also, I want to point out one thing. I usually like it when people give me the benefit of the doubt. And so typically I try to give other people the benefit of the doubt as well. And so while everything that we discussed was based on facts and supported by evidence, we ultimately don't know what the truth is. Maybe it really was the case that Mark was trying to establish himself as an international businessman. He saw Jeffrey Epstein as just a billionaire magnate. Maybe he had no idea about Jeffrey Epstein's salacious empire that he was running behind the scenes, and he was just caught up in things beyond his control. That could very well be the case. And so without concrete evidence, I personally try not to judge anyone. And instead, I just present you with the facts so that you can make up your own mind. Regardless though, the reason that this particular case even crossed my desk, crossed my radar, was because I was doing research on a separate, suspicious Jeffrey Epstein-related suicide. You see, almost exactly a year ago, in February of 2022, a French modeling agent who happened to be a close associate with Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his prison cell over in Paris. Specifically, the man's name was JeanLuc Brunel. You can see a photo of him here with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell on their airplane. And Mr. JeanLuc was found, just like his friend, hanging by his neck in his prison cell. Now, in case you've never heard of him before, back in the year 1977, using funding from Jeffrey Epstein, Mr. JeanLuc Brunel co-founded a modeling agency over in France called Karen Models, as well as MC2 Model Management here in the US. Now, French authorities have been investigating Mr. Brunel for several years now as a part of their investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, and they eventually arrested Mr. Brunel at an airport as he was trying to board a flight to Senegal on suspicion of drugging, sexually assaulting, and sexually harassing multiple minors as well as multiple adults. And by the time that Mr. Brunel was found hanging in a cell, he had already been there for over a year as French authorities were building up their sexual trafficking case against him. Now, it's worth noting that up until the very end, Mr. Brunel denied any wrongdoing. And even after his death, his lawyers claimed that he had been, quote, crushed by the allegations, and they blamed his death on a media judicial system. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment, I wanted to mention that the sponsor for today's episode is a super cool company called Sekur. And they're a cool company for people that actually care about their privacy. Because listen, if you don't think that these giant tech conglomerates and all these different alphabet agencies within the US government are spying on your messages, well, then frankly, you are not paying enough attention to the news. However, all that can be in the past because with Sekur, they have awesome proprietary technology that has all your messages and all your emails actually go through Switzerland as they're making their way back and forth between you and your recipient. And so let's say you're here in America and the person you're messaging is over in Canada, Mexico, or anywhere else in the world. Well, it doesn't matter because all your messages are actually going through Switzerland back and forth from one to another, meaning that they are not subject to the Cloud Act and they are only subject to Swiss laws, which are some of the safest in the entire world. Their technology is awesome, it's proprietary, and they're a company that actually cares about your freedom. They care about getting the facts out, which is why they sponsor a company like ours. And best of all, they are offering a 25% off deal for our viewers, for the viewers of Facts Matter. So head on over to Sekur.com and use promo code Roman to get 25% off. And the rates are not even that expensive to start with. It's only $5 for the messenger and $10 for the email and messenger combo. And they even offer a 7-day free trial. So again, head on over to Sekur.com, use promo code Roman, save some money, and support an awesome sponsor. On the flip side, however, some of the alleged victims in this case, they were just disappointed that justice would never be served. For instance, here's what a Dutch former model who claimed that Mr. Brunel had drugged and sexually abused her when she was a minor, here's what she said, quote, "After more than 2.5 years of fighting for justice, since I reported Brunel in September of 2019, it's a huge disappointment he will never face a judge." Then another one of the alleged victims, she wrote this on Twitter shortly after Mr. Brunel's death, quote, I'm disappointed that I wasn't able to face him in a final trial to hold him accountable, but I'm gratified that I was able to testify in person last year to keep him in prison. And so that is the status of this case. We're still looking into it, but to be frank with you, the amount of publicly available information that's available to journalists regarding Jeffrey Epstein's giant underground empire is just amazingly stark. The man seemed to have a Rolodex of anyone and everyone, and yet all the files remain sealed and not available to the public. They're just sitting on some FBI server without having the light of day shown on them. It really makes you wonder. Regardless, if you'd like to read more about either of the two cases that we discussed in today's episode, I'll throw all my research notes down into the description box below this video so you can peruse them at your own leisure. And furthermore, I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think Jeffrey Epstein's death was really self-inflicted? And what about Mr. JeanLuc Brunel? The circumstances between them were extremely similar. In fact, I didn't mention it earlier, but in Mr. Brunel's cell, at the time of his death, the cameras were reportedly not recording. So what do you really think is going on here? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them later tonight as well into the weekend. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.